The cop slams a young black girl onto the pavement, accusing her of something she didn't do. She screams for help, but no one steps in, until she reaches for her smartwatch and makes one call. The cop laughs, convinced no one can touch him. But the moment the voice on the other end speaks, his entire world shatters, because the girl's father isn't just anyone. He's the U.S. Attorney General. What happens next will shake the entire police force, exposing secrets they never wanted the world to see. Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. And if you like this story, don't forget to subscribe. The autumn sun painted Liberty Park in warm golden hues, its rays filtering through the rustling leaves of maple trees. 9-year-old Maya Carter sat contentedly on a wooden bench, her pink backpack placed neatly beside her. Her legs swung back and forth in a steady rhythm as she hummed the catchy tune they'd learned during today's field trip to the Natural History Museum. The park was peaceful at this hour. Maya watched a young couple jog past, their matching neon running shoes catching her eye. A few benches away, a mother pushed a stroller while talking on her phone, and an elderly man walked his fluffy golden retriever along the winding path. Maya smiled as the dog wagged its tail at a squirrel scampering up a nearby tree. She glanced at her new smartwatch, a birthday gift from her father. It was 3:45 p.m. Her dad, the Attorney General, had texted that he'd pick her up at 4 p.m. sharp. Maya loved these quiet moments when she could just sit and observe the world around her. The bench had become her favorite waiting spot, positioned perfectly under the shade of a towering oak tree. The peaceful atmosphere shifted when a police cruiser rolled slowly through the park's circular drive. Officer Briggs sat behind the wheel, his cold eyes scanning the area with practiced suspicion. 20 years on the force had taught him to trust his instincts, and something about the little black girl sitting alone made those instincts buzz. He watched her through his windshield, noting how she seemed to be waiting. In his experience, kids hanging around parks alone were usually up to no good. Maybe she was a lookout, he thought. Maybe she was waiting for someone to make a drug drop. He'd seen it before, dealers using children as cover for their operations. Briggs pulled his cruiser to a stop, the engine idling quietly. His hand unconsciously brushed against his utility belt as he stepped out, feeling the familiar weight of his weapons. The leather creaked as he adjusted the belt, making sure his taser and gun were easily accessible. His polished boots crunched against the fallen leaves as he approached Maya, his tall frame casting a long shadow across the ground. Maya noticed the shadow first, then looked up to find Officer Briggs looming over her. His face was set in hard lines, his jaw clenched tight. She sat up straighter, suddenly aware of how alone she felt, despite the other people in the park. "You look like you're up to something," Briggs said, his voice cutting through the peaceful afternoon air like a knife. His eyes narrowed as he studied her, looking for any sign of guilt or fear that would confirm his suspicions. Maya's heart began to beat faster, but she kept her voice steady, just like her father had taught her. "I'm just waiting for my dad," she explained, trying to sound calm despite the growing knot in her stomach. Briggs's expression darkened. He'd heard every excuse in the book, and this one was too simple, too convenient. Without warning, his hand shot out and grabbed Maya's wrist, fingers closing around it like a vice. She let out a startled cry as he yanked her off the bench, her backpack tumbling to the ground. The world spun around Maya as Briggs forced her down. Her cheek scraped against the rough pavement, and tears sprang to her eyes from the sharp pain. She could feel the weight of his knee pressing into her back, making it hard to breathe. Through blurry eyes, Maya saw the other park-goers watching. The joggers had stopped, their faces frozen in shock. The mother with the stroller had pulled out her phone, but she wasn't calling anyone, just recording. The old man with the dog had turned away, pretending not to see. Nobody moved to help. Nobody spoke up. Terror clawed at Maya's chest as she struggled to draw breath under Briggs's weight. Her father's words echoed in her mind. "If you're ever in trouble, baby girl, use the watch. I'm always just one button away." With trembling fingers, she managed to reach her free hand toward the smartwatch. Through muscle memory alone, she found and pressed the emergency contact button, praying it would work. The watch vibrated once, confirming the call had gone through. Maya closed her eyes tight, tears streaming down her face as she waited for help to arrive. The morning dew had soaked through Maya's jeans where she lay pressed against the grass, making her shiver despite the warm autumn day. Her wrists burned as Officer Briggs roughly yanked them behind her back, his grip so tight she could feel her pulse throbbing against his fingers. The weight of his knee dug into her spine, making each breath a struggle. Around them, the park had grown eerily quiet. The cheerful sounds of children playing and birds singing seemed to fade away, replaced by the heavy silence of people trying their best to disappear. A jogger who had stopped to watch now fumbled with his earbuds, turning up his music until the bass drowned out Maya's whimpers. The woman with the stroller, who had been recording moments ago, suddenly found somewhere else to be, her pace quickening as she pushed past them. Maya squeezed her eyes shut, fighting back tears that threatened to spill down her cheeks. She couldn't cry. Not now. She had to stay strong, had to keep her mind clear. The emergency call was still connected through her smartwatch, her lifeline to help. Her father had always told her that staying calm in scary situations could save her life. She took a shaky breath, trying to focus on anything but the pain shooting through her arms as Briggs tightened his grip even further. The watch speaker crackled to life and a familiar voice filled the air, deep, controlled, but tinged with concern. "Baby?" The sound of her father's voice broke through Maya's careful composure. "Daddy," she sobbed, her words tumbling out in a rush. "He's hurting me." Officer Briggs didn't loosen his hold. If anything, his fingers dug deeper into Maya's skin as a cruel smile spread across his face. He had dealt with plenty of crying kids before, and some important daddy on the phone didn't impress him. He increased the pressure of his knee against Maya's back, making her gasp. "Who's your daddy, huh?" Briggs taunted, leaning down close to Maya's ear. "Think he can save you?" His breath was hot against her skin, carrying the stale scent of coffee and cigarettes. "Bet he's just another wannabe tough guy who—" The sharp crackle of his radio cut through his words. A stern voice filled with authority commanded, "Briggs, let her go. Now." Briggs paused, but only for a moment. The smile never left his face as he considered the order. This wasn't the first time someone had tried to interfere with his work. He had a system for handling complaints, a carefully cultivated network of fellow officers who knew how to make problems disappear. Reports got lost, witness statements became confused, and evidence had a way of vanishing before it reached the right desks. He ignored the radio's command, reaching behind him with his free hand to grab his handcuffs. The metal clinked as he pulled them from his belt, the sound making Maya flinch beneath him. "Just doing my job," he announced loudly, making sure anyone watching could hear. "Suspicious individual, possibly involved in illegal activities." The cold steel of the handcuff kissed Maya's wrist as Briggs snapped it into place. The metal teeth bit into her skin, and she couldn't hold back a cry of pain. He was reaching for her other hand when something in the air changed. A shift in pressure, a new tension that made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. The sound of squealing tires cut through the park's uneasy silence. A black SUV with tinted windows came tearing down the circular drive, moving with precise aggression. The vehicle barely came to a stop before all four doors flew open simultaneously, the sound echoing like gunshots across the park. Briggs looked up, his confident smile faltering for the first time. 5 men in crisp black suits emerged from the SUV with practiced efficiency. Their movements were synchronized, purposeful, and unmistakably professional. Each wore an earpiece and carried themselves with the unmistakable bearing of Secret Service agents. The color drained from Briggs's face as realization dawned. His stomach dropped, and the handcuffs suddenly felt very heavy in his hands. For the first time in his 20-year career, a cold tendril of fear crept up his spine as he realized he might have finally crossed a line he couldn't uncross. The agents moved forward in formation, their shoes crunching against the gravel with measured steps. Their faces were impassive, but their eyes were sharp and focused entirely on Briggs. They carried no weapons in their hands, but their suit jackets were carefully unbuttoned, ready for quick access to their sidearms if needed. Maya lay still beneath Briggs's weight, but now there was a glimmer of hope in her tear-filled eyes. She recognized these men. They were her father's protection detail, the same agents who had attended her birthday parties, who brought her ice cream after school, who taught her how to spot someone following her. Now they moved toward her with the same protective instinct that had made them her second family. The tension in the air was almost visible, like heat waves rising from summer pavement. The Secret Service agents moved with practiced precision, their steps silent despite the gravel beneath their polished shoes. Their hands hovered near their weapons, ready but restrained. Each agent's face remained professionally blank, but their eyes held the intensity of predators closing in on their target. A second black SUV squealed to a stop behind the first, its engine still rumbling. The passenger door swung open with deliberate slowness. A tall figure emerged, his presence commanding immediate attention. Attorney General Carter didn't rush. He didn't run. He didn't need to. His measured steps carried more weight than any dramatic dash could have achieved. Maya whimpered from her position on the ground, Briggs's knee still pressing into her back. One handcuff dangled from her wrist, the metal catching the morning sunlight. Her father's footsteps drew closer, each one echoing with purpose across the now silent park. The Attorney General's gaze found Officer Briggs, and in that moment, the temperature seemed to drop several degrees. His eyes, usually warm when looking at his daughter, had turned to steel. The look he fixed on Briggs wasn't just angry. It was the calculated stare of a man who had spent his career bringing down corrupt officials, who knew exactly how to dismantle someone's world piece by piece through the full force of the law. Briggs felt sweat beginning to bead on his forehead. His mind raced, trying to piece together how everything had gone so wrong so quickly. Who had called them? The radio command. It made sense now. But how had they arrived so fast? The park had been empty just minutes ago, and now it felt like the entire federal government was descending upon him. The screech of another vehicle announced the arrival of his police chief. The older man practically leaped from his cruiser, his face flushed red with fury. He stormed toward the scene, badge glinting in the morning light, his usually neat uniform wrinkled from what must have been a frantic drive to the park. "Briggs!" The chief's voice boomed across the grass. "What the hell did you do?" The question hung in the air, heavy with the weight of every complaint, every suspicious incident, every time the chief had defended his officer to the oversight board. Briggs opened his mouth, ready to spin the same stories that had worked so many times before. He'd say the girl was acting suspicious, that she'd resisted, that he'd followed protocol. The words were there, practiced and familiar on his tongue. But before he could speak, Attorney General Carter's voice cut through the air like a blade. "Get your hands off my daughter." The words were quiet, measured, but they carried an authority that made everyone in the vicinity stand a little straighter. It wasn't just a father's command. It was the voice of the highest-ranking law enforcement official in the country, a man who could unleash the full power of the Justice Department with a single phone call. Briggs hesitated, his fingers still gripping Maya's wrist. Throughout his career, he had always been the one with the power. He was the one who decided who to stop, who to question, who to arrest. He was the one protected by the badge, by the system, by the thin blue line that had always kept him safe. But now, looking at the wall of federal agents surrounding him, at his chief's furious expression, at the Attorney General's unwavering stare, he realized he was on the other side of that power for the first time. A third vehicle pulled up, an unmarked car that practically screamed FBI. Two agents stepped out, their badges prominently displayed. They moved to flank the Attorney General, completing the circle of federal authority that had formed around Briggs. Under the weight of all those watching eyes, the Secret Service agents with their hands still near their weapons, his chief, whose face had turned from red to purple, the FBI agents documenting every move. Briggs finally released his grip on Maya. His fingers uncurled slowly, leaving red marks on her skin where he had held her. Maya scrambled away from him the moment she was free. She pushed herself up from the grass, her legs shaky but determined. In seconds, she crossed the space between them and threw herself into her father's waiting arms. The Attorney General caught her, holding her tight against his chest. His large hand gently brushed away the dirt that had smeared across her cheek from the pavement. His touch was tender, careful, everything that Briggs's handling of her had not been. Then, still holding his daughter close with one arm, Attorney General Carter turned back to face Briggs. The look in his eyes had changed. The calculated anger was still there, But now it was mixed with something else. The cold certainty of a man who had just watched someone hurt his child and knew exactly what he was going to do about it. For the first time in his 20-year career, Officer Briggs felt real fear curl in his stomach. Not the adrenaline rush of a chase or a confrontation, but genuine fear. The kind that came from knowing he had finally pushed too far, had finally hurt the wrong person, had finally crossed a line that would have real consequences. As he stood there, surrounded by the full force of federal law enforcement, Briggs realized that all his usual protections, all his carefully cultivated connections, all his practiced excuses, were worthless against the power he had just challenged. The park had transformed from a peaceful morning sanctuary into a crowded spectacle. Phones emerged from pockets and purses like flowers blooming in spring, their camera lenses capturing every moment of this unprecedented scene. The whispers grew louder, spreading through the gathering crowd like wind through leaves. Parents pulled their children closer, joggers stopped mid-stride, and dog walkers stood frozen, their pets sensing the tension in the air. Briggs felt the control he had wielded so confidently just moments ago slipping through his fingers like water. His eyes darted from face to face, searching for any sign of support, any familiar blue uniform that might step forward to back him up. But his fellow officers remained at a distance, their expressions unreadable, their silence deafening. The morning sun seemed to shine brighter now, highlighting every detail of this moment, the sweat beading on Briggs's forehead, the dirt on Maya's clothes, the stern faces of the federal agents surrounding them. The Secret Service maintained their protective formation around the Attorney General and his daughter, while the FBI agents moved with purposeful steps toward Briggs. One of the FBI agents, a woman with sharp eyes and an even sharper voice, stepped forward. Her badge caught the sunlight as she moved, the golden shield a reminder of the higher authority she represented. "This man is under federal investigation," she announced, her voice carrying across the now hushed park. "Stand down, officer." The words hung in the air like thunder before a storm. Briggs felt his throat tighten, but he forced out a laugh, a nervous, hollow sound that betrayed his growing fear. "You can't be serious," he said, trying to maintain his usual bravado. But his voice cracked slightly, undermining his attempt at confidence. Attorney General Carter took a measured step forward, still keeping Maya close to his side. His presence seemed to fill the space between them, making Briggs feel smaller with each passing second. "Check his record," Carter instructed, his voice calm but carrying an undercurrent of controlled fury. Another FBI agent, this one holding a tablet, began tapping on the screen. The morning light reflected off the glass as he worked, his fingers moving quickly across the surface. The park fell silent except for the soft sounds of birds and the distant hum of city traffic. Everyone waited, watching as Briggs' truth began to unravel in real time. "File unsealed," the agent announced, his eyebrows rising as he scrolled through the documents. Multiple complaints of racial profiling dating back years, numerous incidents of excessive force, particularly against minority youths. He continued reading, his professional tone doing nothing to soften the impact of each revelation. Evidence tampering in at least 7 cases. Suspicious patterns of body cam malfunctions during confrontations. With each word, Briggs felt his carefully constructed world crumbling around him. For years, he had operated with impunity, secure in the knowledge that the system would protect him. He had built his career on intimidation and fear, counting on the silence of his victims and the complicity of his colleagues. Every complaint had been buried, every investigation stalled, every piece of damaging evidence conveniently misplaced. The FBI agent looked up from the tablet, his expression a mixture of disgust and determination. "Briggs," he said, shaking his head slowly. "You're done." Briggs opened his mouth, ready to deploy the excuses and explanations that had served him so well in the past. He had talked his way out of trouble before. Surely he could do it again. But before he could form the first word, before he could begin spinning his usual tales of justified force and necessary action, the cold metal of handcuffs closed around his wrists with a decisive click. The sensation sent a jolt through his body. His heart pounded against his ribs like a trapped animal trying to escape. This couldn't be happening, not to him. He was supposed to be the one putting the cuffs on others, not wearing them himself. His eyes frantically searched the crowd, looking for help from his fellow officers, but they remained where they were, some looking away, others watching with grim satisfaction as justice finally caught up with one of their own. The system that had protected him for so long now stood silent. The thin blue line he had hidden behind for years had evaporated like morning mist. As the FBI agents began leading him toward their waiting vehicle, Briggs caught sight of Maya, still holding tight to her father's hand. The Attorney General's other hand rested protectively on her shoulder, his stance both comforting and defiant. The irony of the moment wasn't lost on anyone present. For once, it wasn't a black child being led away in handcuffs while parents watched helplessly. Instead, it was Briggs, the officer who had terrorized so many children like Maya, who was being taken into custody, his badge and authority stripped away, his power finally broken. Maya's face was tear-stained but resolute as she watched the man who had hurt her being led away. Her father's presence beside her seemed to give her strength, and she stood a little straighter, her chin lifted slightly. The morning sun caught the tears on her cheeks, making them shine like tiny stars of defiance against all the fear and pain Briggs had tried to inflict. The FBI vehicle's interior felt suffocating to Briggs. The handcuffs bit into his wrists, a sensation he had never truly appreciated until now. Through the tinted windows, he could see the park he had patrolled countless times, but everything looked different from this angle. The same metal restraints he had so carelessly slapped on children's wrists now served as his own prison, each small movement a reminder of his powerlessness. Outside, Maya pressed herself against her father's side, her small fingers gripping his suit jacket as if it were a lifeline. The morning that had started so peacefully now felt heavy with tension. The park's familiar landscape, the wooden benches, the winding paths, the rustling trees, had transformed into something alien and threatening. Her body wouldn't stop shaking, even though she knew she was safe now. Attorney General Carter looked down at his daughter, his expression softening as he studied her face. The fierce protectiveness in his eyes mixed with concern as he gently touched her shoulder. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice carrying both tenderness and barely contained rage. Maya paused, considering the question. Her wrists still burned where Briggs had grabbed her, and her cheeks stung from the pavement, but those weren't the wounds that scared her most. She shook her head slowly. "Just scared," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Her father's jaw tightened and he took a deep breath, his chest rising and falling with controlled fury. "Not for long," he promised, the words carrying the weight of both comfort and determination. His hand squeezed her shoulder gently, a reminder that she was protected now. The crowd in Liberty Park had grown considerably. People stood in clusters, their phones raised high, capturing every moment of this unprecedented scene. The morning air filled with the low buzz of conversations, theories, and shocked exclamations. Some recognized the Attorney General. Others pointed at Briggs in the FBI vehicle, but all sensed they were witnessing something significant. The police chief, his face flushed red with embarrassment and stress, pushed through the crowd. His uniform, usually a symbol of authority, seemed to weigh heavily on his shoulders as he approached the Attorney General. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the mild morning temperature. "Sir," he said, trying to maintain a professional tone, "we can handle this internally." The words hung in the air like a bad joke. Attorney General Carter turned to face the chief, his movement sharp and deliberate. The look in his eyes made the chief take an involuntary step backward. "You had years to handle it," Carter responded, his voice cutting through the morning air like a blade. "And you buried every complaint." The chief's throat worked as he swallowed hard. The truth of those words hit him like physical blows. Every ignored report, every dismissed complaint, every conveniently lost piece of evidence. It all came rushing back. He had been part of the system that protected Briggs, and now that system was crumbling before his eyes. Maya watched the exchange with wide eyes, still holding on to her father's jacket. She looked up at him, her voice small but steady. "Is he going to jail?" Her father's expression softened as he looked down at her. He sighed, a sound heavy with the weight of knowledge about how the justice system worked. "Not yet," he answered honestly, "but he will." The FBI agents finished securing Briggs in the vehicle. The man who had terrorized so many children now sat alone, surrounded by the consequences of his actions. Through the window, his face showed a mixture of disbelief and fear, emotions he had caused in others so many times before. The black SUVs began to pull away from the curb, their engines humming quietly. The crowd parted to make way for the vehicles, phones still recording, witnesses to this moment of justice in motion. Briggs disappeared behind the tinted glass, his power stripped away, his badge meaningless. As the vehicles drove off, an eerie silence fell over Liberty Park. The same trees that had witnessed countless incidents of Briggs' abuse now stood witness to his downfall. The morning sun continued to shine, indifferent to the drama that had unfolded beneath its rays. Maya watched the cars until they disappeared around the corner. The trembling in her body had finally begun to subside, but something deep in her chest, a feeling she couldn't quite name, told her this wasn't over. The morning's events had changed something fundamental, not just in her life, but in the very system that had allowed Briggs to operate unchecked for so long. The park remained unnaturally quiet, as if holding its breath. The same ground where Maya had been forced down now felt different beneath her feet. The same bench where she had sat waiting for her father stood as a silent reminder of how quickly things could change. The system that had once protected Briggs had finally turned against him, leaving him to face the consequences of his actions alone. The sleek government vehicle glided through the city streets, carrying Maya and her father away from Liberty Park. Two black SUVs filled with Secret Service agents followed close behind, a constant reminder of the morning's events. Maya sat quietly in the back seat, her small fingers wrapped tightly around her backpack straps, knuckles white from the grip. Her eyes remained fixed on the passing scenery, but she wasn't really seeing it. The adrenaline that had kept her going was starting to fade, leaving her body feeling heavy and tired. Her wrists still held the ghost of Briggs's grip, and her cheeks stung where it had scraped against the pavement. But those physical reminders weren't what bothered her most. It was the memory of feeling so helpless, so afraid. Attorney General Carter watched his daughter carefully from his seat beside her. His face, usually composed for the public eye, showed clear concern as he studied her profile. The morning sun streaming through the window highlighted the small scrape on her cheek, and his jaw tightened at the sight. He had spent his career fighting against injustice, but seeing it touch his own child made the battle feel more personal than ever before. "You did the right thing calling me," he said softly, breaking the silence that had settled in the car. Maya swallowed hard, her eyes still focused on the window. "What if I hadn't?" Her voice was barely above a whisper, but the question filled the entire vehicle with its weight. A long silence followed. Her father didn't answer, couldn't answer. They both knew what that silence meant. It spoke of all the other children who hadn't had a direct line to the Attorney General, all the other kids who had faced Briggs alone with no one to call, no one to save them. The silence carried the weight of countless untold stories, of justice denied, of power abused. Across town at the police station, the atmosphere crackled with tension. Officers moved through the hallways with unusual quietness, their usual camaraderie replaced by an undercurrent of unease. Briggs sat in a holding cell, his police uniform now feeling like a costume rather than a symbol of authority. The squad room buzzed with whispered conversations and concerned glances. Officers gathered in small groups, their coffee cups growing cold in their hands as they discussed the morning's events. Some stood with arms crossed, faces tight with anger, but not at Briggs. Their anger was directed at the system they thought would always protect their own. "They really just let the feds take him?" Officer Martinez muttered, leaning against his desk, his voice carrying a mix of disbelief and indignation. Officer Thompson shook his head, his weathered face showing clear displeasure. "The Attorney General is making an example of him," he replied, spitting out the words like they left a bad taste in his mouth. "This isn't about justice, it's about politics." In the corner of the squad room, Officer Wells stood quietly, observing the scene before him. As one of the few black officers in the precinct, he had a different perspective on the morning's events. He had seen Briggs in action before, had witnessed the casual cruelty, had heard the whispered complaints that never went anywhere. He had watched as evidence disappeared, as body cam footage went missing, as complaints were buried under paperwork and bureaucracy. Wells didn't feel an ounce of sympathy for Briggs. He had seen this pattern play out too many times before. An officer would cross a line, there would be outrage, promises of investigation, and then nothing. The system would protect its own, and everything would go back to normal. But this time felt different. This time, the victim had been the Attorney General's daughter, and the usual rules didn't apply. In the holding cell, Briggs leaned against the cold concrete wall, his uniform feeling increasingly uncomfortable as sweat soaked through the fabric. His mind raced through scenarios, possibilities, escape routes. He had been in tight spots before, complaints, investigations, even internal affairs. But he had always managed to slip free. The system had always been on his side. But as he sat there, alone in the cell, something felt different. The usual confidence that had carried him through previous incidents was missing, replaced by a growing sense of dread. His fellow officers' angry mutters didn't provide the comfort they usually did. The chief's absence spoke volumes. The familiar machinery that had always worked in his favor seemed to have ground to a halt. Because this time, his victim wasn't just another face in the crowd. She wasn't just another complaint to be filed away and forgotten. She was the daughter of the most powerful prosecutor in the country, a man with the authority and resources to tear down the very systems that had protected Briggs for so long. Briggs wiped his sweaty palms on his uniform pants, his breathing shallow and quick. The cell felt smaller with each passing minute, the walls closer, the air thinner. For the first time in his career, he truly understood what it felt like to be on the other side of the bars, to be at the mercy of a system that no longer saw him as one of its own. The next day, the morning news cycle exploded like a storm across every platform. Headlines screamed from TV screens, phones buzzed with notifications, and social media feeds filled with viral videos of the incident. The footage, captured by bystanders at Liberty Park, showed the moment when Officer Briggs had forced Maya to the ground, followed by the dramatic arrival of federal agents and the Attorney General himself. Police officer detained after brutalizing US Attorney General's daughter. Federal investigation into racist policing begins. The headlines blazed across screens everywhere, accompanied by photos of Maya, her father, and Officer Briggs being led away in handcuffs. News anchors dissected every detail, their voices grave as they discussed the implications of what had happened. At Washington Heights Middle School, the usual morning bustle felt different. Teachers gathered in small clusters, their conversations dropping to whispers whenever students passed by. The hallways hummed with unusual energy as kids huddled together, sharing news updates on their phones and discussing what they'd heard from their parents. Maya walked through the school entrance, trying to make herself as small as possible. She wore her backpack high on her shoulders like armor and kept her eyes fixed on the floor. But she couldn't escape the stares. Students stopped mid-conversation to watch her pass. Some pointed, others whispered behind their hands. A few even pulled out their phones, as if hoping to catch something newsworthy. The attention felt suffocating. Maya had always been quiet, preferring to blend into the background. Now she felt like an exhibit in a museum, with everyone studying her every move. Her cheek still bore a faint scrape from the pavement, and she resisted the urge to cover it with her hand. "Maya," a familiar voice cut through the whispers. Jada, her best friend, pushed through a group of staring sixth graders to reach her. Her dark braids bounced as she rushed forward, her face etched with concern. "Everyone's talking about you." Maya clutched her backpack straps tighter, her shoulders hunching. "I don't want to talk about it," she said softly, her voice barely audible above the hallway chatter. Jada's expression softened with understanding. Without another word, she fell into step beside Maya, creating a protective barrier between her friend and the curious onlookers. She shot stern looks at anyone who stared too long or pointed too obviously. Meanwhile, across town at the Justice Department, the Attorney General's office had transformed into a center of controlled chaos. Staff members rushed back and forth, phones rang constantly, and urgent meetings filled every conference room. The morning's papers lay scattered across desks, their headlines screaming for attention. Attorney General Carter sat behind his desk, his posture rigid as he listened to his senior advisors. The room buzzed with tension as they presented their concerns. "Sir," began Thompson, a veteran political advisor, his face creased with worry. "This case could destabilize law enforcement relations across the board. We're already getting pushback from multiple police unions." He shuffled through a stack of papers. "They're claiming this is an overreach of federal authority." Another advisor chimed in, "The timing is sensitive. With the upcoming election cycle?" "Then let them push," Carter interrupted, his voice calm but firm. His eyes carried the same intensity they had shown at the park. "This isn't about politics. This is about justice." The advisors exchanged uneasy glances. They knew that look. It was the same expression he wore when taking on major corruption cases, the look that had earned him both respect and powerful enemies throughout his career. At the police station, the atmosphere had shifted from tense to panicked. Officers hurried through corridors carrying boxes of files. Internal affairs investigators had arrived early that morning, demanding access to all of Briggs's case files. The chief's office door remained closed, but raised voices occasionally leaked through. "They're reopening everything," Officer Martinez said, watching as another box of files was carried past. "Every complaint, every incident report, every traffic stop Briggs ever made." The young black officer Wells stood nearby observing the chaos. He remembered all the times families had come in to file complaints against Briggs, black parents with children who had been harassed, intimidated, or worse. He remembered how those complaints had always seemed to vanish into thin air. But now those same families were coming forward again. News stations were interviewing them, lawyers were taking their calls, and suddenly, their stories mattered. The system that had ignored them for so long couldn't look away anymore. "The feds are requesting all body cam footage from the last 5 years," announced Sergeant Kelly, emerging from the chief's office. His face was pale. "They're not just looking at Briggs. They're looking at everyone who worked with him, everyone who supervised him." The implications hung heavy in the air. For years, the department had covered for Briggs, buried complaints, lost evidence. Now, that carefully maintained wall of silence was crumbling. In the holding cell, Briggs sat on the hard bench staring at the blank concrete wall. His uniform had been replaced with standard-issue orange, the color making him look sickly under the fluorescent lights. The confidence that had carried him through countless complaints and investigations had evaporated, leaving behind a shell of uncertainty. The sound of footsteps drew his attention. His lawyer, Davidson, appeared at the cell door. The man's usual polished appearance was slightly rumpled, his tie loose and his briefcase overstuffed with papers. But it was his expression that made Briggs's stomach drop. Davidson looked grim. "They're not just investigating you," Davidson said without preamble, his voice low. "They're going after the whole department. Every officer who worked with you, every supervisor who dismissed a complaint, every internal affairs investigator who cleared you." He paused, letting the words sink in. "This isn't going away." Briggs stared at his lawyer, the full weight of the situation finally settling on his shoulders. In all his years on the force, he had never worried about consequences. There had always been someone to cover for him, always a way to make problems disappear. But as he sat in his cell watching his lawyer's defeated expression, he understood. He wasn't getting out of this one. The evening sun cast long shadows through the bulletproof windows of the Carter family's government residence. Maya sat cross-legged on the plush leather couch in their living room, her favorite drawing notebook balanced on her lap. Her colored pencils were scattered across the coffee table, but she couldn't focus on creating anything. Her hand hovered over the blank page, uncertain. 2 Secret Service agents stood guard outside, their dark suits and earpieces visible through the front windows. Another pair patrolled the perimeter of the house. It had been like this since the incident at the park. The security presence doubled, then tripled. Maya's fingers traced the fading scrape on her cheek. The physical mark was healing, but something else lingered, a heaviness that sat in her chest, making even simple things like drawing feel different. From the kitchen, her mother's voice cut through the quiet of the house. It was sharp, controlled, but Maya could hear the anger underneath. She had never heard her mother sound quite like this before. Number absolutely not. Her mother's heels clicked against the hardwood floor as she paced. We will not be intimidated. Do you understand me? A pause. I don't care who's calling. The answer is no. Maya set down her pencil, straining to hear more. Her mother's voice grew louder, each word precise and cutting. Number, we will not be intimidated, and you can tell whoever sent you that we're not backing down. The sound of approaching footsteps made Maya turn. Her father entered the living room, his usual composed demeanor showing cracks. His jaw was clenched tight, and his tie hung loose around his neck. Dark circles under his eyes betrayed sleepless nights spent at the office reviewing files and building the case. Maya looked between her parents, anxiety crawling up her throat. Her mother had ended the call and now stood in the kitchen doorway, her phone gripped tight in her hand. The tension in the room felt thick enough to touch. What's happening? Maya asked, her voice small in the heavy silence. Her father's expression softened as he looked at her, but worry still creased the corners of his eyes. He crossed the room and sat beside her on the couch, the leather creaking under his weight. For a moment, he seemed to debate how much to say. Finally, he exhaled slowly. We've received threats. Maya's mother moved closer, her heels silent now on the carpeted living room floor. She placed a protective hand on Maya's shoulder. Nothing we can't handle, sweetheart. But Maya wasn't a little kid anymore. She could read the concern in their faces, hear it in their voices. Because of Officer Briggs? Her father nodded grimly. Some people don't want this case to move forward. They're trying to scare us into dropping it. The threats had started as whispers, growing louder with each passing day. Anonymous calls flooded the Justice Department switchboard. Messages appeared in official inboxes, warning of consequences if the investigation continued. Even the Attorney General's private number, supposedly secure, received texts from blocked numbers, all carrying the same message: back off. At the police station, the tension was palpable. Officers who had worked alongside Briggs for years found themselves divided. In the break room, heated arguments broke out over coffee. Some called Briggs a disgrace, a stain on the badge who had finally been caught. Others saw the investigation as an attack on law enforcement itself. They're trying to destroy the whole department, Officer Reynolds complained loudly, crushing his paper cup. Using one bad incident to tear down everything we've built. Across the room, Officer Wells shook his head. One bad incident? You know damn well this wasn't just one incident. We all saw what Briggs was doing, for years. The division spread beyond the station walls. Police unions across the country released statements supporting Briggs, calling the federal investigation an overreach. Politicians began taking sides. Some demanded justice, while others called the case a political stunt, designed to weaken law enforcement. News vans camped outside the station, their satellite dishes reaching toward the sky like metal trees. Reporters ambushed officers coming and going from their shifts, shoving microphones in their faces, demanding comments about Briggs, about the Attorney General, about the investigation. And at the center of it all was Maya. Her face appeared on news channels, in newspapers, across social media. Some called her brave, a symbol of change. Others questioned her story, suggested it was staged for political gain. Her school had to hire additional security to keep reporters away. The weight of it all pressed down on the Carter household. Extra patrols circled their street. Mail was screened. Phones were monitored. Every precaution was taken. Every threat treated as serious. That night, Maya lay in her bed, staring at the ceiling. The shadows of trees danced across her wall, cast by the security lights outside. She could hear the quiet footsteps of agents patrolling, their radios occasionally crackling with hushed updates. Sleep felt far away. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Officer Briggs's face, felt the rough pavement against her cheek. The memory of his knee pressing into her back made her shudder. The house had finally grown quiet. Her parents' voices had stopped drifting up from downstairs. Even the TV news, which seemed to run constantly these days, had been silenced. Then crash. The sound of shattering glass ripped through the night. Maya bolted upright in bed, her heart hammering against her ribs. For a moment, she sat frozen, gripping her blankets. Her bedroom door burst open. Her father stood there, his eyes sharp and alert. He was still in his work clothes, as if he hadn't even tried to sleep. Behind him, she could hear the sudden rush of movement in the hallway. "Maya, stay where you are," he commanded, his voice tense. From downstairs, Secret Service agents shouted to each other. Radios crackled with urgent communications. Heavy footsteps thundered through the house. "Clear the perimeter," a voice called out. "Subject heading east on foot." Maya's mother appeared behind her father, her face pale but composed. "The dining room window," she said quietly to her husband. "They threw something through it." More agents rushed past in the hallway. Maya could hear them coordinating, spreading out to search the property. The security lights outside grew brighter, flooding the neighborhood with artificial day. Through it all, Maya sat in her bed, her heart still racing. She wanted to ask what was happening, but the words stuck in her throat. Her father's phone buzzed. He looked at the screen, his expression darkening. An agent appeared at the door, holding something in a clear evidence bag. "Sir," the agent said, his voice grim, "you need to see this." In the bag was a brick, ordinary except for 2 words painted across its surface in dripping red paint. "Drop it." The brick lay like an ugly accusation in the middle of their pristine living room. Shattered glass glittered across the hardwood floor, catching the light from the security lamps that now flooded their yard. The words "drop it" stared up at them in blood-red paint still wet and dripping. Maya stood frozen in the doorway, her stuffed giraffe clutched tightly against her chest. She couldn't take her eyes off the brick, the way the red paint looked almost like blood in the harsh lighting. Her mother's arms wrapped around her from behind, pulling her close, but even that familiar comfort couldn't stop the trembling in her limbs. The Attorney General stood by the broken window, his shoulders rigid with tension. Glass crunched under his feet as he shifted, studying the jagged hole where their dining room window used to be. His jaw worked back and forth, a telltale sign of barely contained fury that Maya had learned to recognize over the years. Secret Service agents moved through the house with practiced efficiency. Some secured the perimeter, while others photographed the evidence and collected samples. Their radios crackled with updates, voices kept low and professional despite the urgency of the situation. All clear on the east side. No sign of the suspect on the west perimeter. Checking security footage now. Agent Thompson, the lead agent on their security detail, approached Maya's father. His face remained carefully neutral, but tension lined his eyes. "Sir," he said, his voice steady but firm, "we need to move your family to a safer location. This is a direct threat." Maya felt her mother's arms tighten around her. The thought of leaving their home made her stomach twist. This was where all her books were, where her friends lived nearby, where she felt safe, or used to feel safe before Officer Briggs changed everything. Her father turned from the window, his expression hardened with determination. "No," he said firmly, his voice carrying the same authority it held in courtrooms. "We're not running." "Sir," Agent Thompson persisted, "with all due respect, I said no." Her father's voice cut through the room like steel. "We will not be intimidated, not by Briggs, not by his supporters, not by anyone." He looked at Maya, his eyes softening slightly. "This is our home and we're not leaving." Outside their walls, the situation was spiraling. Social media platforms blazed with heated debates and angry posts. Video clips of Maya's encounter with Briggs played on endless loops, each side spinning their own narrative. Justice for Maya trended alongside "Turn Back the Blue." Comment sections became battlegrounds where strangers fought virtual wars with words as weapons. "Briggs is a racist monster who finally got caught. This is what happens when good cops try to do their jobs. The AG is using his daughter for political gain. Finally, someone's standing up to police brutality." The division spilled onto the streets. In front of the courthouse, 2 different crowds gathered. On one side, protesters held signs demanding justice for Maya and other victims of police brutality. Their chants echoed off the building's stone facade. "No more Briggs, no more hate." Across the street, a sea of Blue Lives Matter flags waved as counter-protesters showed their support for law enforcement. Their voices rose in response. "Back the blue! Back the blue!" At the police station, the atmosphere grew increasingly hostile. Officers who had worked alongside Briggs for years clustered in corners, their voices low but angry. Some refused to go on patrol, calling in sick or claiming equipment malfunctions. "This is what we get for doing our jobs," one veteran officer spat, throwing his coffee cup into the trash. "One mistake, and they crucify you." "Mistake?" Officer Wells challenged from across the break room. "You call what he did to that little girl a mistake?" The tension followed Maya to school, where the impact of her father's investigation created invisible but unmistakable battle lines. Some teachers treated her with extra kindness, offering encouraging smiles and gentle words. Others barely looked at her, their disapproval evident in their cold shoulders and clipped responses. During lunch period, Maya sat at her usual table, pushing food around her plate without eating. She could feel the stares, hear the whispers. A boy from her math class walked past, his face twisted with anger he'd clearly learned from home. "My dad says your dad hates cops," he sneered loud enough for everyone to hear. "He says your dad is trying to destroy the whole police force." Maya's hands trembled as she gripped her fork tighter, but she didn't respond. Her father had taught her that some people's minds were already made up, and no amount of explaining would change them. That evening, the Carter household hummed with tension. Maya's father sat in his study, watching the news on a small desktop monitor. The volume was low, but Maya could still hear it from where she stood in the doorway. A police rally filled the screen. Hundreds of officers and their supporters had gathered, many wearing shirts with Briggs' badge number or holding signs declaring his innocence. A reporter pushed through the crowd, shoving her microphone toward a gray-haired man identified as a former police captain. The man's face filled the screen, his expression thunderous. "Briggs is innocent," he declared, jabbing his finger toward the camera. "This is nothing but a witch hunt by an attorney general with a political agenda." His voice grew louder, more threatening. "And let me be clear. If the attorney general wants a war with law enforcement, he's got one." Maya watched as her father's hands clenched into fists, his knuckles white with tension. He exhaled sharply, a sound that carried all the weight of what they were facing. The situation wasn't just getting worse. It was becoming dangerous in ways none of them had anticipated. Sometime later, the Justice Department's conference room felt heavy with tension as the Attorney General sat at the head of the massive oak table. Morning light filtered through the tall windows, casting long shadows across the concerned faces of his advisors. Papers rustled nervously as they exchanged glances, none wanting to be the first to speak. Finally, Sarah Chen, his chief legal counsel, cleared her throat and pushed a manila folder across the polished surface. "Sir, we have a situation. Briggs's legal team they're leaking information." She paused, her usual professional demeanor cracking slightly. "They're trying to discredit Maya." The Attorney General's hand stilled over the folder. The room fell silent, even the usual background noise of phones and computers seeming to fade away. With deliberate calm, he opened the folder and felt his blood turn to ice. Spread before him were documents that painted his daughter as a troubled child. School records that had never existed showed patterns of aggressive behavior. Photographs that had been subtly altered to change the context of innocent moments. Fabricated behavior reports from teachers whose names he'd never heard, describing incidents that had never happened. "They're trying to make it look like she was aggressive with Briggs," explained Marcus Reynolds, his media strategist, disgust evident in his voice. "They're spinning a narrative that she provoked him, that his response was justified." The Attorney General studied the forged documents, his expression carved from stone. A fabricated counselor's note suggested Maya had anger management issues. Another claimed she had a history of making false accusations for attention. Each page was a carefully constructed lie designed to destroy a 9-year-old girl's credibility. "Sir," Sarah continued, her voice tight with controlled anger, "they're planning to leak these to sympathetic media outlets. They're trying to control the narrative before the trial." The Attorney General closed the folder with precise movements, his face unreadable. The room waited, tension building as he remained silent. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet, but carried the weight of absolute authority. Shut it down. Meanwhile, across town, Maya's world was crumbling. The hallways of her elementary school, once filled with friendly faces and casual conversations, had become a gauntlet of whispers and suspicious stares. She kept her head down as she walked to class, but she couldn't block out the voices. "She made it all up," a girl whispered loudly to her friend as Maya passed. "My mom saw it on Facebook." "She's trying to get a cop killed," another student declared during recess. "That's what my dad says." "She just wants attention," someone else added. "Like, why else would she make such a big deal about it?" Maya clutched her books tighter to her chest, trying to make herself smaller. The security of having video evidence of what really happened seemed to matter less and less. Somehow people were finding ways to twist even that. In history class, the whispers grew bolder. A boy 2 rows behind her didn't even bother to lower his voice. "My uncle's a cop. He says Briggs is a good officer who's being set up." Jada, sitting next to Maya, whirled around in her seat. Her eyes flashed with anger as she confronted the boy. "Are you kidding me? You saw the video. He tackled her. She was just sitting there." The boy shrugged, unfazed by Jada's outburst. "Maybe he had a reason. You don't know everything that happened." Maya's hands shook as she tried to focus on her textbook. The words blurred before her eyes. Even with clear video evidence, even with witnesses, even with the truth right there for everyone to see, people were still finding ways to twist it into something else. Lunch period became the worst part of her day. The cafeteria, with its long tables and social groupings, felt like a minefield. Groups that used to welcome her now turned away when she approached. Conversations stopped when she walked past, only to resume in hushed tones once she was gone. Maya sat alone at the far end of a table, picking at her sandwich without appetite. She could feel the stares, sense the judgment. Even some teachers seemed different now, their smiles a little more forced, their interactions more cautious. That evening, alone in her room, Maya sat cross-legged on her bed with her tablet. Despite her parents' warnings about avoiding social media, she couldn't help herself. She opened various platforms and immediately saw her name trending. The comments seemed endless, a digital tidal wave of opinions and arguments about her, her father, and the case. Some defended her fiercely, sharing the video and demanding justice. Others questioned every detail, looking for ways to justify Briggs's actions. Why was she alone in the park? What was she wearing? Her father is just using this for political gain. She probably said something to provoke him. Maya stared at the screen, her stomach twisting into knots. The truth was right there, captured on video, witnessed by dozens, and yet people still found ways to deny it, to reshape it, to make it fit their own beliefs. Comment after comment scrolled past, each one either defending her or attacking her, using her name and her story as ammunition in their own battles. She wasn't even a person to them anymore, just a symbol, a talking point, a way to prove their own beliefs right. That was the scariest part. The truth didn't even matter anymore. Reality had become whatever people wanted it to be, twisted and reshaped until it fit their preferred narrative. Even with evidence, even with proof, even with her own lived experience, people would believe what they wanted to believe. Maya's finger hovered over the screen, trembling slightly as she read comment after comment. Her name appeared again and again, but the person they were talking about didn't feel like her anymore. It felt like a character in a story, someone else's version of Maya Carter, shaped by their own biases and beliefs. The tablet's screen grew blurry as tears welled in her eyes. She wanted to scream the truth, to make them understand, to somehow force them to see what really happened. But she was beginning to realize that for some people, the truth didn't matter at all. Inside the dimly lit conference room of the police union headquarters, tension crackled through the air like static electricity. A group of officers sat around a long table, their faces illuminated by harsh fluorescent lights that cast unflattering shadows across their worried expressions. Captain Reynolds, a tall man with graying temples and cold eyes, stood at the head of the table, his presence commanding attention. With deliberate force, Reynolds slammed a thick folder onto the polished wood surface, making several officers flinch. "We need to stop this investigation before it buries all of us." His voice carried the weight of someone who knew too many secrets. Officer Martinez, a younger cop with 15 years on the force, shifted uncomfortably in his chair. His brow furrowed as he spoke up. "Briggs screwed up. We should cut our losses." The words hung in the air like smoke, drawing sharp looks from several veteran officers. Reynolds planted his hands on the table and leaned forward, his shadow stretching across the documents scattered before them. "If Briggs goes down, we all go down." The emphasis wasn't lost on anyone present. Years of covered-up incidents, buried complaints, and twisted reports connected them all like a web of silent guilt. The room fell into a heavy silence. Officers exchanged nervous glances, some adjusting their collars, others staring intently at their hands. The only sound was the quiet hum of the air conditioning and the occasional creak of a chair. Finally, Sergeant Thompson, a stocky man with 3 decades on the force, muttered the question they were all thinking: "So what do we do?" The next morning, the carefully orchestrated plan unfolded. An anonymous police blog, known for its pro-law enforcement stance, published what it called a bombshell report. The headline screamed across social media: "Maya Carter's father is corrupt. New evidence suggests Attorney General using federal power to take down police officers." The blog post was entirely fabricated, filled with unnamed sources and vague allegations. But in the modern media landscape, truth had become secondary to speed. Within hours, cable news networks picked up the story, their talking heads debating the implications of these serious allegations. Politicians, eager to align themselves with law enforcement, began quoting the blog in press conferences and social media posts. "These troubling allegations must be investigated," they declared, giving more credibility to the lies with each mention. The fabricated story spread like wildfire across the internet. Social media amplified it, comment sections exploded with conspiracy theories, and suddenly, the narrative had shifted. The story was no longer about Briggs attacking a 9-year-old girl. It was about her father's supposed vendetta against law enforcement. At Riverside Elementary School, Maya felt the immediate impact of the smear campaign. Her teacher, Mrs. Henderson, who had always been warm and encouraging, now refused to meet her gaze. When Maya raised her hand in class, Mrs. Henderson called on other students. During group assignments, she hurried past Maya's desk without checking her work. The whispers in the hallway grew louder, more pointed. "My dad says her father is trying to destroy the police," one student said loudly as Maya passed. "He's probably working with criminals," another added. Maya kept her head down, trying to focus on her schoolwork, but the weight of the accusations pressed down on her like a physical force. Even the school principal seemed different, watching her with wary eyes when she walked past his office. At the Justice Department, Maya's father sat in his office, watching the lies about him spread across every major news network. His hands were clasped together so tightly his knuckles had turned white. The fury in his eyes was cold, calculated, the rage of a man who understood exactly what was happening. His assistant entered with another stack of news reports and social media analyses. "Sir, they're targeting Maya now. Some of the more extreme sites are..." She trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. The Attorney General didn't need her to continue. He'd seen the posts himself. Conspiracy theorists analyzing his daughter's school pictures, suggesting she was trained to make false accusations, questioning her character. They weren't just coming after him anymore, they were trying to destroy his 9-year-old daughter. As evening fell over the city, the Justice Department's office was nearly empty. Most staff had gone home, leaving only security personnel and a few dedicated employees working late. The Attorney General was reviewing case files when an encrypted email arrived. Attached was a video file. The footage was grainy, clearly taken from a security camera in a poorly lit parking lot. 2 figures stood in the frame, both wearing police uniforms. One handed the other a thick file, their movements furtive and quick. A digitally altered voice accompanied the video. "Briggs ain't the only dirty cop in the force. You want the truth? Meet me tomorrow, alone." The Attorney General leaned forward, his heart pounding as he rewound the footage. He watched it again and again, studying every detail. The way the officers moved, the familiar stance of one figure, the location he recognized as the back lot of the 7th Precinct. Someone inside the department wanted to talk, someone who knew the truth about not just Briggs, but potentially the entire corrupt system that had protected him for so long. The video ended, leaving the Attorney General staring at his dark computer screen, his reflection showing a man caught between hope and suspicion. The possibility of finally exposing the full scope of the corruption was tantalizing, but the word alone echoed in his mind like a warning bell. The parking garage was a cavern of shadows and dim fluorescent lights, their buzzing creating an eerie symphony with the distant sound of traffic. The Attorney General's black SUV rolled silently into an empty spot on the 3rd level, its engine cutting off with a soft purr. For the first time in years, he was truly alone. No Secret Service, no security detail, no advisors hovering nearby. He sat for a moment, his hands still gripping the steering wheel, scanning the area through the windshield. The garage appeared empty, except for a few scattered vehicles, their shapes like sleeping giants in the half-light. His phone buzzed, another message from his security team, no doubt wondering why he'd dismissed them. He ignored it. The Attorney General stepped out of the SUV, his footsteps echoing in the concrete space. His suit jacket felt heavy with the weight of his decision to come alone. The air was thick with the smell of oil and exhaust, and somewhere in the distance water dripped steadily. Movement caught his eye, a figure emerging from behind a concrete pillar. The man wore civilian clothes, jeans, a dark jacket, nothing that screamed, "police officer." But the Attorney General recognized him immediately. The young face, the cautious stance, the way he carried himself, all hallmarks of law enforcement. "You were at the station when Briggs was arrested," the Attorney General said, his voice carrying across the empty space. It wasn't a question. The man nodded, stepping closer into the pool of dim light. "Officer Wells." His voice was steady, but his hands fidgeted slightly at his sides. Up close, the Attorney General could see the toll this meeting was taking on him. Dark circles under his eyes, tension in his jaw, the slight tremor in his movements. Wells glanced over his shoulder before reaching into his jacket. The Attorney General tensed for a moment, but Wells produced only a thick manila folder, its edges worn and creased. "This is everything," he said, extending the folder with a slightly shaking hand. The Attorney General took it, feeling the weight of what he knew must be inside. Opening the folder, he began to scan the contents under the weak garage lighting. His breath caught as he processed what he was seeing. Page after page of buried complaints against officers, reports of excessive force, racial profiling, false arrests, all systematically dismissed or hidden. There were screenshots of deleted body cam footage, internal memos from police brass ordering investigations closed, documentation of evidence being altered or destroyed. The names jumped out at him, not just beat cops but sergeants, lieutenants, captains, officials he'd seen at community meetings, shaking hands and promising reform, officers who'd been promoted despite dozens of complaints, supervisors who'd helped bury evidence of misconduct. Wells stood quietly, watching the Attorney General process the information. Finally, he spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "Sir, this doesn't stop with Briggs." The Attorney General continued scanning the names, his jaw tightening with each familiar one he encountered. High-ranking officials, powerful cops with political connections, officers who'd been lauded as heroes in the press while their victims suffered in silence. Wells exhaled shakily, running a hand through his hair. "The department is infected," he said, glancing around the garage again, "and they'll do anything to keep it that way." The Attorney General's grip tightened on the folder, the papers crinkling slightly under his fingers. The implications of what he held were staggering. This wasn't just about one racist cop who'd attacked his daughter. This was evidence of systemic corruption, a cancer that had spread throughout the entire department. Moving forward with this would mean more than taking down Briggs. It would mean declaring war on an entire system of power and privilege that had protected its own for generations. The threats, the intimidation, the smear campaigns, they would pale in comparison to what would come next. Wells shifted nervously, checking his watch. "I should go," he said quietly. "They can't know I was here." He turned to leave but paused, looking back at the Attorney General. The young officer's face showed both fear and determination, the expression of someone who knew they were risking everything for what was right. The Attorney General stood alone in the garage, the damning folder heavy in his hands. Above him, the fluorescent lights continued their endless buzzing, casting harsh shadows across the concrete floor. In the distance, a car horn honked, a reminder of the city continuing its normal rhythm, unaware of the earthquake that was about to shake its foundations. The Attorney General's home office was bathed in the warm glow of his desk lamp, casting long shadows across the walls lined with law books and family photos. The thick manila folder lay open before him, its contents spread across the polished wooden surface. Each page told a story of corruption that went deeper than he'd imagined. False reports carefully crafted to protect abusive officers, documentation of destroyed evidence, internal memos ordering investigations closed without cause. His eyes burned from hours of reading, but he couldn't stop. The names jumped out at him. Officers he'd met at community meetings, captains who'd smiled and promised reform, supervisors who'd built careers on maintaining the status quo. All of them complicit in a system designed to protect its own at any cost. The sound of small footsteps in the hallway made him look up. Maya stood in the doorway, still in her pajamas decorated with cartoon stars, her hair slightly mussed from trying to sleep. Her eyes were wide with concern as she watched her father. "Daddy?" Her voice was soft, hesitant. The Attorney General's face softened at the sight of his daughter, though the exhaustion remained etched in the lines around his eyes. Papers rustled as he shifted in his chair, turning slightly to face her. Maya took a small step into the office, her bare feet silent on the carpeted floor. Her gaze flickered between her father's tired face and the scattered documents on his desk. She understood more than most 9-year-olds would. She had to, after what happened to her. "Are you going to stop them?" she asked, her voice carrying both hope and worry. The Attorney General pushed his chair back slightly and opened his arms. Maya crossed the room and climbed onto his lap, settling against his chest like she used to when she was younger. He pressed a gentle kiss to the top of her head, breathing in the familiar scent of her strawberry shampoo. "I have to," he said quietly, his arms tightening protectively around her. The weight of the evidence before him, combined with the weight of his daughter in his arms, made the decision both harder and easier. Harder because he knew what it might cost them, easier because he knew what it would cost everyone if he didn't act. Across town, in the stark fluorescent lighting of the police union headquarters, a very different scene was unfolding. Captain Reynolds stood at the head of a long table, his face twisted with rage as he processed the latest information. Around him, other high-ranking officers shifted uncomfortably in their seats, their faces pale with the realization of what was happening. "He has the files," one officer hissed, his knuckles white as he gripped the edge of the table. The words hung in the air like smoke, choking the room with their implications. Reynolds's fist came down hard on the table, making coffee cups rattle and papers jump. "Then we make sure he can't use them," he growled, his voice carrying the dangerous edge of a man who had everything to lose. The other officers exchanged glances, some nervous, others determined. They all knew what was at stake, not just their careers, but their freedom. If those files became public, if the truth came out about what they'd done, what they'd covered up, a plan began to take shape in the tense atmosphere of that room. Whispered suggestions, careful nods, calculated risks. They'd protected their own for years. They weren't about to stop now. Later that night, the Attorney General stood in his office at the Justice Department, surrounded by his most trusted advisors. The folder sat in the center of his desk like a live bomb waiting to detonate. His security team, hand-picked agents he knew couldn't be bought, stood ready. "This goes public in 48 hours, he said, his voice firm as he handed over the folder. "Make sure it's airtight. Every piece of evidence, every name, every connection. I want it verified and documented. We only get one shot at this." His team nodded, understanding the gravity of what they were about to undertake. They'd seen the contents of the folder, seen the web of corruption it revealed. They knew what they were up against. The Attorney General stepped out of his office, loosening his tie slightly as he headed for the elevator. The day's tension sat heavy on his shoulders, but there was a sense of purpose in his steps. They were finally going to expose the truth, finally going to make real change. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out, frowning at the blocked number on the screen. After a moment's hesitation, he answered. "Hello?" The voice that came through was distorted, mechanical, impossible to identify. But the words were crystal clear, cutting through the static like a knife. "Drop it, or you'll never see your daughter again." The Attorney General's hand tightened on the phone, his knuckles turning white. The threat hung in the air, each word a hammer blow against his heart. In his mind, he saw Maya's face, felt her small body in his arms just hours ago, the thought of anything happening to her. But he also saw the faces of countless other children, children who looked like Maya, children who'd been terrorized by officers like Briggs, children whose parents didn't have the power to protect them, children who needed someone to finally stand up and say enough. The morning sun filtered through the windows of Maya's school, casting long shadows across the freshly waxed hallway floors. Maya clutched her backpack straps tightly as she made her way through the corridor, trying to keep her head high despite the weight pressing down on her shoulders. The familiar sounds of lockers clanging and students chattering filled the air, but there was something different about it today. Something darker. The whispers seemed louder than usual, like hissing snakes following her every step. Groups of students huddled together, their eyes tracking her movement, their conversations dropping to hushed tones as she passed. "That's her. Did you see what they're saying about her dad? My parents say he's trying to destroy the police." Maya kept walking, focusing on the sound of her sneakers against the floor. One step at a time. That's what her father had taught her. Just keep moving forward. But as she rounded the corner toward her classroom, her path was suddenly blocked. A group of older students, 6th and 7th graders, formed a wall across the hallway. Their faces weren't friendly. Tommy Martinez, a 7th grader known for causing trouble, stood at the center. His phone was held out in front of him like a weapon, screen glowing with what looked like a news article. His lips curled into a sneer that made Maya's heart skip a beat. "Guess your dad doesn't care about cops, huh?" Tommy's voice carried through the hallway, drawing more attention from passing students. He waved his phone in Maya's face. Maybe he shouldn't have made enemies. Maya's stomach twisted into knots. The corridor suddenly felt too small, too crowded. She could feel dozens of eyes on her, watching, waiting. Some students had their phones out, probably recording. The weight of their stares made her skin crawl. "I just want to get to class," Maya said, trying to keep her voice steady. She attempted to step around the group, but they shifted to block her path again. "What's wrong?" another boy taunted. "Not so brave without your daddy's bodyguards around?" Maya's hands trembled slightly, but she gripped her backpack straps tighter, trying to draw strength from the pressure. She thought about what her father would say, what he would do. But before she could decide on her next move, someone shoved her backpack hard from behind. The force knocked the bag off her shoulder, sending it crashing to the floor. Books, pencils, and papers scattered across the hallway tiles. The sound of laughter echoed off the walls as Maya watched her belongings slide in different directions. Mrs. Henderson, her English teacher, stood just a few feet away at her classroom door. Their eyes met for a brief moment. Maya saw the conflict on her teacher's face, the hesitation. But Mrs. Henderson simply turned away, stepping back into her classroom without a word. The silence of the adults' retreat hurt more than the shove. Maya felt tears threatening to form, but she blinked them back hard. She wouldn't cry. Not here. Not in front of them. As she bent down to gather her things, a voice whispered close to her ear, low enough that only she could hear. "Your family should watch their backs." Maya's hands froze halfway to her scattered notebook. The words sent ice through her veins. This wasn't like the usual teasing or bullying she'd dealt with before. This wasn't about lunch money or playground politics. This was different. This was a threat. The kind her father had been receiving. The kind that made Secret Service agents guard their house at night. She remained crouched there, her mind racing with the implications of what she'd just heard. The hallway seemed to spin slightly, the fluorescent lights above suddenly too bright, too harsh. Hey! A familiar voice cut through the tension. Back off! Jada pushed through the crowd, her face tight with anger. She immediately dropped to her knees beside Maya, helping to gather the scattered supplies. The older students, perhaps sensing that their fun was over, began to drift away, though Tommy made sure to bump Maya's shoulder as he passed. Maya, we need to tell someone, Jada said urgently, shoving books back into Maya's backpack. Her dark eyes were filled with concern as she looked at her friend. This isn't okay. They're threatening you. Maya shook her head, swallowing back the tears that still threatened to fall. Her throat felt tight, but she managed to whisper, No. But Maya, I said no. Maya's voice was firmer this time, though her hands still shook as she zipped up her backpack. I can't be the girl who runs to her dad for help again, not after everything. Jada helped Maya to her feet, keeping a protective hand on her friend's arm. The hallway was emptying now as students headed to their first classes, but the weight of what had happened hung heavy in the air. Maya knew deep in her heart that this wasn't over. The threat wasn't just words thrown by mean kids, it was a message. Someone was using these students to get to her father. The realization made her feel small and vulnerable in a way that even Briggs's attack hadn't. As they walked to class together, Maya couldn't shake the feeling that she might not be safe anymore. Not at school, maybe not anywhere. But she kept these thoughts to herself, forcing a small smile when Jada squeezed her hand in support. The morning bell rang, its sharp tone echoing through the now empty hallway. Maya took her seat in class, but she couldn't focus on the teacher's words. All she could think about was the whispered threat and the growing fear that this was just the beginning. The evening cast long shadows through the dining room windows of the Carter residence. The smell of pot roast filled the air, but the usual warmth of family dinner was replaced by a heavy tension. Maya sat at the large oak table, pushing her carrots around her plate with her fork, creating abstract patterns in the gravy. Her father's papers were spread across the other end of the table, evidence files, testimonies, and photographs that would expose years of police corruption. He had been reviewing them all day, preparing for tomorrow's press conference that would shake the entire department to its core. Maya watched him adjust his reading glasses, his forehead creased in concentration. The weight of what he was about to do seemed to add years to his appearance. The lines around his eyes were deeper, his shoulders slightly hunched from hours of preparation. Dad, Maya said softly, setting down her fork. The metal clinked against the china plate, drawing both her parents' attention. Maybe we should stop. The Attorney General paused, carefully placing his own fork beside his barely touched dinner. His expression grew serious as he studied his daughter's face. Why? Maya's fingers twisted in her lap, her eyes dropping to the tablecloth. The threat from school still echoed in her mind, mixing with all the other warnings they'd received. The brick through their window, the anonymous calls, the hostile stares from people who used to smile at them. What if they come after us? Her voice was barely above a whisper, but in the quiet dining room, it carried like a shout. Her mother's sharp exhale cut through the silence. She set down her water glass with more force than necessary, causing small ripples to dance across its surface. They already are. The truth of those words hung heavy in the air. Maya's mother reached across the table, covering her daughter's hand with her own. Her wedding ring caught the light, the diamond sparkling despite the somber mood. Sweetheart, her mother continued, her voice gentle but firm. Running away now won't make us safer. It will only tell them that threats work. The Attorney General stood up, walking around the table to kneel beside Maya's chair. His large hand came to rest on her shoulder, warm and reassuring. Remember what we talked about? About doing what's right even when it's hard? Maya nodded slowly, remembering all their conversations about justice, about standing up for what you believe in. Her father had always taught her that true courage wasn't about not being afraid. It was about doing what needed to be done despite the fear. I know it's scary, he continued, his voice soft but steady. But if we back down now, Briggs and everyone like him will keep hurting other children, other families, and they'll know they can get away with it. Meanwhile, across town at the police station, a different kind of family dinner was taking place. In a dimly lit conference room, several officers huddled around a table littered with coffee cups and takeout containers. These were Briggs' allies, men and women who had too much to lose if the truth came out. Officer Martinez, a veteran with 20 years on the force, leaned forward in his chair. His face was illuminated by the harsh fluorescent lights above, casting sharp shadows across his features. "If we can't shut him up, we can ruin him." The words hung in the air for a moment before he reached into his briefcase. He pulled out a thick manila folder, its edges worn as if it had been handled many times. With deliberate slowness, he slid it across the table's surface. The folder contained what looked like official documents, financial records, internal memos, witness statements. But every single page was fabricated. Carefully crafted lies designed to destroy the Attorney General's credibility. False bank statements showing suspicious deposits, doctored emails suggesting abuse of power, manufactured testimonies from non-existent whistleblowers claiming he had used his position to target police officers for personal vendettas. Captain Reynolds picked up one of the documents, his eyes scanning the detailed forgery. "This is good work. Very good." He looked up at the others gathered around the table. "How fast can we get this out?" "I've got contacts at 3 major news networks," another officer replied. "They're hungry for anything that could discredit him, especially after all this anti-police rhetoric." The group spent the next few hours planning their attack, making calls to sympathetic journalists, preparing to release their poison into the media bloodstream. By the time they finished, the sun had long since set and their coffee had gone cold. The next morning arrived with the harsh buzz of the Attorney General's phone. The vibration was so intense it nearly fell off his bedside table. He reached for it, squinting at the screen. 27 missed calls, dozens of text messages, all from the past hour. His heart rate quickened as he sat up in bed. Something was wrong. Very wrong. He grabbed the TV remote, clicking on the morning news. The screen flickered to life, and his heart stopped. The headline banner stretched across the bottom of the screen in bold red letters, "Breaking U.S. Attorney General under investigation for alleged abuse of power." The news anchor's voice filled the room, professional and detached as she detailed the shocking allegations against him. Documents suggesting financial misconduct. Witnesses claiming he had manipulated evidence. Accusations that his crusade against police corruption was actually a personal vendetta. He heard footsteps in the hallway and turned to see Maya standing in the doorway. She was still in her pajamas, her hair mussed from sleep. Her eyes were fixed on the TV screen, growing wider as she read the headline. Her small hand gripped the doorframe so tightly her knuckles turned white. The look on her face, a mixture of fear, guilt, and dawning understanding, made his heart ache. They were coming for them just as she had feared, but not with bricks through windows or threatening phone calls. They were coming with something far more dangerous, lies wrapped in the appearance of truth, designed to destroy everything her father had built. The morning sun struggled to penetrate the thick bulletproof glass of the Carter residence windows. The house felt different now, less like a home and more like a fortress. Secret Service agents stood at attention in the hallways, their earpieces occasionally crackling with hushed communications. The usual sounds of morning routine had been replaced by the steady rhythm of footsteps as agents patrolled the perimeter. Maya sat curled up on the living room couch, her school tablet untouched beside her. She hadn't been to class in 3 days, not since the threats had escalated. Her teachers sent her work electronically, but she could barely focus on fractions and vocabulary when her whole world seemed to be crumbling around her. Her mother's heels clicked against the hardwood floor as she paced back and forth. The usually composed woman now showed clear signs of strain. Her designer suit was slightly wrinkled, and her normally perfect hair had escaped its neat bun in places. She held her phone in a white-knuckled grip, scrolling through news headlines with increasing agitation. "They're not just trying to discredit you," she said, her voice tight with worry as she turned to face her husband. "They want to bury you." She thrust the phone toward him, showing yet another damaging headline. The Attorney General stood by the window, his silhouette framed against the morning light. He looked tired, the kind of bone-deep exhaustion that came from fighting a battle on multiple fronts. His suit jacket was draped over a chair, his tie loosened, small signs of the pressure he was under. He rubbed his forehead, a gesture Maya had seen more frequently in the past few days. "I won't let them," he said, his voice carrying the same steady determination that had defined his career. But there was something else in his tone now. Not fear, exactly, but awareness of the stakes they were facing. Maya watched her father, studying the way he stood straight despite the weight on his shoulders. She wanted to be brave like him, but fear kept creeping in, cold and insistent, like the draft from under a door. The atmosphere in the house was thick with tension. Even the Secret Service agents seemed more alert than usual, their eyes constantly scanning, hands never far from their weapons. The threats against the family had transformed their home into something between a sanctuary and a prison. At the Justice Department, the morning brought a shocking development. The federal courthouse, usually a place of measured justice, became the source of a bombshell that sent shockwaves through the legal community. A federal judge, one known for his connections to the police union, suddenly authorized an arrest warrant for the Attorney General himself. The news spread through the building like wildfire. Staff members whispered in corners, phones buzzed with urgent messages, and an air of disbelief settled over the usually bustling offices. One of the Attorney General's closest advisors, Sarah Chen, practically ran through the corridors, her usual professional composure forgotten in the urgency of the moment. She burst into his office, not even bothering to knock. Her face was flushed, her breathing rapid. "Sir," she gasped, clutching a stack of papers. "They're trying to take you down. The warrant, it's based on those fabricated documents. But it's real, and it's signed. You need to step back." The Attorney General stood behind his desk, his expression hardening as he absorbed the news. The morning sun streaming through his office windows cast half his face in shadow. His jaw tightened, a muscle working beneath the skin. "If I stop now," he said, his voice low but firm, "it means they win." He picked up one of the files from his desk, the real evidence, the truth about departmental corruption that had sparked this war. "It means every dirty cop like Briggs gets to keep hurting people's children." Sarah stepped closer, her voice dropping to an urgent whisper. "Sir, they're not playing by the rules anymore. This isn't just about your career. They could actually put you in jail. Think about Maya." At the mention of his daughter's name, something flickered across his face. A father's pain warring with a prosecutor's determination. Meanwhile, in a holding cell across town, Officer Briggs sat on his narrow bunk, eyes fixed on the small television mounted high on the wall. The news coverage of the warrant brought a slow, vicious grin to his face. His weathered features, usually set in a scowl, lifted with malicious satisfaction. The department was protecting him after all, just like they always had. The system he'd relied on for so long was working its magic, turning the tables on the man who dared to challenge it. From his cell, Briggs watched as the carefully orchestrated plan unfolded exactly as his allies had promised. Other inmates might have missed the significance, but Briggs understood the game being played. Every false document, every manufactured piece of evidence, was another nail in the Attorney General's coffin. The same tactics he'd used to bury complaints against himself were now being deployed on a much grander scale. The evening arrived with long shadows and mounting tension. Maya sat on the living room couch, her knees pulled up to her chest, trying to make sense of the worried conversations she'd overheard throughout the day. The TV was off. Her mother had banned news channels, but Maya could feel the anxiety radiating from every adult in the house. The sudden burst of the front door shocking the quiet house made everyone jump. Secret Service agents rushed in, their usual calm professionalism cracking under obvious stress. Their footsteps thundered through the hallway as they made their way to the living room. "Sir," one of them called out, his voice urgent, "they're coming to arrest you." Maya's father stood in the center of the room, somehow maintaining his composure even as chaos erupted around him. He remained still, his expression unreadable as he processed the news. The room seemed to hold its breath, waiting for his response. Maya felt her heart pounding as she slid off the couch. She moved to her father's side, her small hand gripping his sleeve. The fabric of his suit felt familiar and safe, like it always had. But nothing else felt safe anymore. "Daddy," she whispered, her voice trembling. "What's happening?" For the first time that day, her father's carefully maintained composure softened. He knelt down to her level, his movements gentle despite the urgency of the moment. His warm hands cupped her face, and she could see in his eyes all the love and worry he'd been trying to hide. "Whatever happens next," he whispered, his voice steady despite everything, "don't be afraid." Hours later, the black SUVs rolled up to Maya's home with silent menace, their headlights cutting through the gathering dusk. The setting sun painted the sky in shades of orange and purple, but there was nothing beautiful about this evening. One by one, federal agents in tactical gear emerged from the vehicles, their movements precise and practiced. Their dark uniforms and stern expressions made them look like shadows come to life. From her perch at the upstairs window, Maya watched it all unfold like a nightmare she couldn't wake up from. Her small hands gripped the curtain so tightly her knuckles turned white. The fabric felt rough against her palms, giving her something real to hold on to as her world crumbled around her. The street below had transformed into a media circus. News vans lined the curb, their satellite dishes reaching toward the darkening sky. Reporters clustered behind hastily erected barriers, their cameras already rolling, hungry for the spectacle they knew was coming. Their excited chatter drifted up to Maya's window, making her stomach churn. Her father stood at the front door, a pillar of strength even now. He had changed into his best suit, dark navy, crisp white shirt, his favorite red tie. He looked exactly like the Attorney General of the United States should look, even in this moment. His back was straight, his chin lifted, showing no fear despite what was about to happen. The Secret Service agents who had protected their family for so long stood on either side of him. Maya could see the tension in their shoulders, the way their hands hovered near their weapons. They were waiting for orders, torn between their duty to protect and the knowledge that this arrest was, technically legal, even if it was based on lies. Maya felt her mother's arms wrap around her from behind, warm and secure. The familiar scent of her perfume, vanilla and jasmine, wrapped around Maya like a comfort blanket. Her mother's hands trembled slightly as she held her daughter, but her voice remained steady. "It's okay, baby," she whispered, her breath warm against Maya's ear. He knew this would happen. The words were meant to comfort, but they made Maya's heart ache even more. Her father had known. He had seen this coming and still chose to fight. Still chose to stand up against the corruption, against the lies, against the people who thought they could hurt children and get away with it. The lead federal agent separated himself from the group, walking up the manicured path to their front door. His footsteps seemed to echo in Maya's ears, each one bringing them closer to the moment she dreaded. The warrant in his hand looked like nothing more than a piece of paper, but Maya knew it carried the weight of all their enemies' lies. The agent's voice cut through the evening air, formal and detached. "Mr. Attorney General, you are under arrest for abuse of power, obstruction of justice, and unlawful targeting of law enforcement personnel." A collective gasp rose from the crowd of reporters. The charges hung in the air like poison. Maya wanted to scream that they were lies, that her father was the good guy, that he was trying to protect people. But her voice seemed trapped in her throat. Her father's response was silence. No protests, no arguments, no pleas. He simply held his hands out in front of him, wrists together, allowing them to place the handcuffs on him. The metal clicked shut with a sound that seemed to echo through Maya's entire body. Camera flashes exploded like lightning, illuminating the scene in harsh bursts of light. The reporters began shouting, their voices overlapping in a cacophony of accusations disguised as questions. "Did you fabricate evidence? Are you corrupt? Is this political revenge?" Each question felt like a physical blow to Maya. She watched as the agents led her father away, his head still held high. He looked nothing like the man who read her bedtime stories, who helped her with homework, who kissed her forehead every morning before leaving for work. Now he looked like what they were trying to make him, a criminal. Maya pressed her face into her mother's chest, unable to watch anymore. Her whole body shook with sobs she tried to hold back. The fabric of her mother's blouse grew damp with her tears. In her mind, one thought kept repeating, growing louder with each echo. They won. They won. They won. Through the window, she could hear the SUV's engine start. The sound forced her to look up one last time, just in time to see her father disappearing behind the dark tinted glass. The vehicle pulled away from the curb, taking her father with it. Maya's throat felt tight as she whispered to herself, her voice barely audible even in the quiet room. "Number not yet." The words tasted like defiance on her tongue. Even as tears streaked her cheeks, even as her heart felt like it was breaking, something inside her refused to accept defeat. She wasn't giving up. Not now. Not when her father had risked everything to do what was right. The reporters continued shouting outside, their voices carrying through the windows. The flashing cameras kept going off like fireworks, lighting up the growing darkness. But Maya barely noticed them anymore. Her eyes remained fixed on the spot where the SUV had disappeared, carrying her father away to face the consequences of standing up for what was right. Hours later, Maya sat in the living room of the safe house, surrounded by thick curtains and reinforced windows. The room felt more like a prison than a sanctuary, with its heavy furniture and stale, recycled air. Secret Service agents patrolled outside, their shadows passing across the windows at regular intervals like clockwork. The constant reminder of danger made her skin crawl, and even the soft hum of the air conditioning seemed to carry threats. Every TV channel seemed to be discussing her father. News anchors debated his guilt with practiced outrage, their voices filling the room despite Maya's mother repeatedly trying to lower the volume. The talking heads traded accusations like they were discussing a movie plot rather than real people's lives. Sources say the Attorney General fabricated evidence. Questions arise about his fitness for office, a pattern of targeting law enforcement. Breaking news on the corruption scandal. Maya's hands clenched into tight fists, her nails digging into her palms until little half-moons appeared in her skin. The lies felt like physical blows, each one striking deeper than the last. These people didn't know anything. They hadn't seen Briggs's face when he threw her to the ground, hadn't noticed the cruel satisfaction in his eyes. They hadn't felt the concrete scraping their skin or tasted the dirt and fear. They hadn't experienced the terror of being helpless while wearing a badge hurt you, while other officers stood by and watched. Her mother paced the room like a caged tiger, phone pressed to her ear, speaking in hushed tones with their lawyers. The strain showed in the dark circles under her eyes and the tension in her shoulders. She hadn't slept properly since they'd arrived at the safe house 3 days ago, surviving on coffee and nervous energy. Every time the phone rang, she jumped as if expecting more bad news. Maya watched her mother's worried face and felt something shift inside her. A determination, hard and bright as steel, settled in her chest. If no one else would fix this mess, she would. She had to. Her father had always taught her that staying quiet in the face of wrongdoing made you part of the problem. Late that night, after her mother had finally fallen into an exhausted sleep on the living room couch, Maya crept down the hallway. Her bare feet made no sound on the carpet, and she held her breath passing the security station where an agent dozed in his chair. The living room was dark, except for the blue glow of electronics and the occasional sweep of headlights from the security vehicles outside, casting strange shadows on the walls. The government laptop sat on the coffee table like a beacon of hope. Maya's heart pounded against her ribs as she opened it, the soft click of the lid seeming impossibly loud in the quiet house. Her father had taught her about computer security, probably more than he should have, but he'd always believed in preparing her for anything. She knew his passwords, knew how to access his private accounts, knew the back doors he'd created just in case. He'd always said knowledge was power. Now she would use that power to save him. Her fingers trembled slightly as she typed out the email. To Carter Wells. Subject: I need your help. The cursor blinked at her, waiting. Maya took a deep breath and attached the file she'd found buried in her father's secure drive. The one he'd been saving for the right moment, labeled simply, Insurance. The one that would change everything. She'd watched it once, and the contents had made her understand why her father had been so careful to hide it. She hit send before she could second-guess herself, before the voice of doubt could talk her out of it. The soft whoosh of the sent email seemed to echo in the silent room. Across town, Officer Carter Wells sat at his desk in the empty precinct, doing paperwork to avoid going home to an empty apartment. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, and the coffee in his cup had long since gone cold. His phone buzzed with the new email notification, the screen illuminating his tired face. When he saw the sender, his hand froze above the screen. The Attorney General's private email account, but he knew the man was in custody, which meant… Wells hesitated, his finger hovering over the delete button. Getting involved had already cost him nearly everything. His fellow officers barely spoke to him now, except to whisper "rat" when he passed. Some had made threats, leaving notes in his locker and slashing his tires. Opening this email could make things even worse. He could lose his badge, his pension, maybe even his life. But he thought of Maya's face that day in the park, of her terror as Briggs pressed her into the concrete. He thought of all the other children who hadn't had someone powerful enough to fight back. He thought of his own silence over the years, and how it weighed on his conscience like lead. He opened the email. The video file downloaded quickly, the progress bar filling with painful slowness. When he pressed play, his office filled with voices he recognized all too well. The footage was raw, unedited body cam video from multiple officers' cameras. But it wasn't just Briggs this time. This was bigger, much bigger than one corrupt cop. There was Captain Reynolds speaking openly about covering up complaints. There were high-ranking officers discussing how to fabricate evidence against the Attorney General. There were meetings in back rooms, deals made in parking garages, money changing hands. There was proof, undeniable proof, of everything. The whole corrupt system laid bare in high definition. Back in the safe house, Maya closed the laptop and leaned back against the couch, her heart still racing, but now with anticipation rather than fear. The soft click of the lid closing felt like sealing a pact. She didn't know exactly what would happen next. She couldn't predict how this would all play out, or who would stand with them when the truth came to light. But she knew one thing with absolute certainty. It wasn't over. Not by a long shot. And this time, they were going to hear her. Not just as the Attorney General's daughter, but as someone who refused to let injustice win, who wouldn't back down even when the whole world seemed against her. The truth was out there now, traveling through digital space, impossible to stop or contain. Like a stone dropped in still water, the ripples would spread. And when they did, everything would change. The corrupt system that had protected people like Briggs would crumble, and something better would rise from its ashes. Maya looked out the window at the dark sky, where the first hints of dawn were beginning to appear. A thin line of purple stretched across the horizon, promising a new day. She wasn't afraid anymore. She was ready. Let them come with their lies and threats. She had something stronger: the truth. The world would soon understand what her father had taught her, that justice might be slow, but it was unstoppable when armed with truth. And sometimes it took a child's courage to remind the adults what justice really meant. If you enjoyed the story of Maya, I handpicked this next story that you will love. Don't miss it. Click here to watch.